Ask Lauren to... Okay, thank you everybody, and welcome to the extraordinary meeting of Blayney Shire Council for the 9th of June. I'd like to thank you all very much for your attendance. In opening this meeting, I'd like to recognise the traditional custodians of this land, the Wiradjuri people, and pay my respects to their elders, both past, present and emerging. Councillors, please make note that we are live streaming this meeting, and anybody in this room could become part of that live streaming. I'd like to move through apologies. Madam GM, I do believe we have an apology for this evening.
Through you, Mr Mayor, yes, we have an apology from Councillor David Kingham. And you have Councillor Denton on Zoom in front of you.
Thank you. I'd like to acknowledge that we do have Councillor Denton on Zoom. You are unable to see him, but I can see his smiling face right here, and who engaged in the meeting. Thank you, Scotty. So I might have a mover that apology be accepted. Thank you. The move, Councillor Reynolds. A second to Councillor Newstead. I'll put that all in favour.
Aye.
Against. Carried. Councillors, now move through to disclosures of interest. Madam GM, do we have any disclosures of interest for the business here this evening?
Yes, Mr Mayor, I have one disclosure of conflict of interest from Councillor Somervale. The report is the Orange 360 funding agreement for 2020-2024, which is item number 2 on page 12. It is a non-pecuniary significant interest, and the reason being, as Council's representative on Orange 360, Councillor Somervale is a director of TDO Limited, which trades as Orange 360, which currently relies on funding from its 3 council members, which includes Blayney, for its financial viability.
Thank you, Madam GM. Councillors, we have no public forum this evening, nor mayoral minutes, so I'd now like to direct your attention to the minutes of the ordinary council meeting held on the 18th of the 5th. To have a mover that is a true record. Thank you. Councillor Ewan has moved that way, and Councillor Somervale has seconded that. Councillors, any matters arising from those particular minutes? Councillor Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just a question on Freight Street, the 2 land parcels, 11A and B. Have they been put on the market, and can the General Manager give us an indication of the pricing if they have been put on the market?
This is a bit of an update. Thank you, Councillor Reynolds. Madam GM.
Through Mr Mayor, I haven't approached real estate agents yet. I've just been talking with some a housing provider who I thought might be interested in the first place, and just with some initial discussions, but formally they haven't been placed on the market. I spoke about the property in the GM conversation, and we'll be doing the marketing in the next few weeks.
Thank you, Madam GM. Thank you, Councillor Reynolds. No other questions in regards to the minutes. We'll now move through to our first item, or second item, which will be item 2, page 12. It's the Orange 360 funding agreement for 2024. Councillor Somervale has declared an interest in this item and is leaving the chamber. Thank you. A recommendation there, councillors 1 and 2, to have a mover for these recommendations. Councillor Ewan has moved these recommendations. Do I have a seconder? Thank you. Councillor Newstead has seconded that. Questions? Councillor Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I have a question and a potential amendment, but as in it may not come to fruition, with regard to the 4-year funding agreement, and it does say that it coincides with council terms, etc. in the report, the election cycles, whereas I would read that actually either a 5-year or a 2-year on the current election cycles would be far more representative. So I suppose a question to the General Manager, why we've selected a 4 years before I potentially foreshadow, even though it's going to be very, very difficult to get a seconder for an amendment, but why we're looking at 4 years for this contract.
Through Mr Mayor, the 4-year funding agreement was the request of Orange 360, just to provide them with that additional year to align with council term that was prior to the change of the Local Government Act, which provided another year for this year's council term.
You can-
Mr Mayor,
Councillor-
I'll move, and depends whether any other councillors agree, to amend though. I'd rather see, so I move to a 2-year agreement rather than the current 4-year agreement to actually coincide with the election cycle. And then a new council in 2 years' time could then make a decision whether they want to continue. I don't know whether I'll have a seconder or not, so rather than talking, if there's no seconder, then I won't address the reasons why.
So you're saying that the first recommendation there, executive, the execution of a 2-year funding agreement instead of 4-year. Okay, as opposed to resolution. Okay, well, you've made your views known. Does anyone have a seconder in regards to debate about the funding term, be it 4 or 2 years? Okay, thank you. So Councillor Newstead has seconded. We now have an amendment being approve the execution of a potential 2-year funding agreement between Council and TDO. You have your seconder, Councillor Reynolds.
Okay,
Would you now like to speak to your amendment?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Yes, as the council and the community are now aware, council's term has been extended by at least 12 months to September next year and maybe out to December next year. There's no actually defined date as far as I'm aware at this stage. If we were to take a 2-year funding agreement rather than the current 4, that would enable a new council to be elected in approximately 15 months, but we don't know exactly, 6 months to examine whether Orange 360 was performing the functions that it's so, to the benefit of the Blayney community, and that new council could have a say in whether they wanted to continue with Orange 360, which at this stage I'm very happy to as a councillor, and that's why I'm recommending a 2-year. But if we go to the 4 years, that new council will pretty well have no say in whether they're involved with Orange 360 or not, or whether they want to promote other tourism activities if they think that Orange 360 is not performing to their desired level. My concern is that we're imposing a decision on a new council that hasn't been elected as yet, and there may be a number of new councillors, who knows, come 15 months' time, and they may want a different direction in tourism, or they may want to continue on the same direction. It still gives the opportunity to continue with a 2-year contract, that they can examine it, but at the same time, it gives them the opportunity to make a decision. Otherwise, the next council will pretty well have no say until the end of their term in the tourism promotion with Orange 360 or going down another pathway. So that's why I have moved this amendment to 2 years rather than the proposed 4 years that is being put up for council tonight.
Thank you very much, Councillor Reynolds. Councillors, any questions or comments regards to the amendment put for Councillor Newstead?
Through you, Mr Mayor, so you're saying that if we do it for 2 years, Bruce, when the new council is elected and would it then go back to a 4-year or still only a 2-year?
You, Mr Mayor, it would be up to the new council on how long they wanted to. The main aim was to try and get it to into the election cycle so that each council could have a say on tourism promotion, whereas the 4-year term won't get it into the election cycle, and we're imposing something on a new council. So that's why I've moved to that. But I personally have nothing against Orange 360 and happy to support Orange 360. I just am more looking at the next council and allowing them to have a say rather than this council locking the new council in 15 months or so into a contract that for the majority of their term.
Thank you, Councillor Reynolds. Thank you, Councillor Newstead.
Just one more quick question through you. Do you think 60 would come at that? They intend on getting a 4-year agreement?
Through you, Mr Mayor, all I can do is refer you to their supporting documentation, which talks about their strategic plan, which they've just adopted, which is 2020-2024. It's a 4-year strategic plan.
Okay, Thank you. I'd like, Councillor Ewan.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. No, I believe we should adopt the 4-year term that the strategic plan suggesting. We have many council contracts and agreements that certainly run over and past our next term of office, so to speak, or the next said election that we've accepted and taken on behalf of the Shire, and one in particular I know runs for 9 years, I think. So I guess if we try to line all our contracts up on the council election term, then I guess the new council, should there be a change in the new council and of more a total whole new council, I think it could be quite daunting for a new council as to whether they're making the right decision if we're going to leave that for a new council. Also too, I believe that we have a current councillor, as will be in the next term of Orange 360, we'll have a councillor that's sitting on that board, so I guess he's our voice, or he or she will be our voice. So we're not totally out of having any say in the matter at any point in time over the 4-year term, I believe. And because it's as I see it, as a regional tourism development that looks after the total region, and we've agreed to be a part of a regional tourism strategy, that I think it would be quite responsible of us to accept the 4-year term, so that when a new council does sit, they can get a better understanding in that 2-year period, and even though they're not making the decision as to put funds towards it, we need to have faith in Orange 360 and our new councils and our region that this is working and working well, which it appears to be at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Ewan. I guess since there's so few of us here, just like to say a couple of words. Certainly, I totally understand Councillor Reynolds' position as far as setting up for each council and not committing too much. But certainly from my experience, and as touched on by Councillor Ewan, it's probably not the main issue here. We do commit this community and the future councils regardless to a lot of things like loans, garbage contracts. There's a lot of things that we do commit way past each election cycle. I think the other issue really is the fact that, and as explained pretty well in the letter from Orange 360, is the certainty. Coming out of the COVID time, they need a solid 4-year commitment to build on the successes that they've had. I know that Orange and Cabon potentially are considering this as well, and I'd like to think that they also would be supportive of 4 years. Now, I'd be a bit disappointed if we were two and the other two important members of our regional tourism entity went 4 years, and again, that'll be up to them. Message that this sends by committing to a 4-year contract is that we are solidly committed to the success of Orange 360, that we are committed to the success of our businesses. I know personally a lot of businesses that have benefited from this being part of this Orange regional tourism entity, and I think they would be very supportive of this council and future councils of the direction of Orange 360, and would welcome the message that Blayney would send out to say that we are 100% behind this entity. It has worked and it's got huge potential in the years to come. From an organisational point of view, and I know Councillor Somervale is out of the room, but I'm sure he would say that the certainty that gives from a budgeting point of view for the next 4 years to continue to work on their platforms is absolutely crucial to the success that they want to deliver for the whole region. So while I acknowledge Councillor Reynolds' concerns around committing future councils will always have the opportunity to revisit in the third year of that term. And it is a little bit confusing, I'll acknowledge that, with the election cycles. But they would have 12 months for the next election, and maybe they're sitting here in 4 years' time considering what they will or won't do. But I think it sends a very strong message to our community that we acknowledge the success of Orange 360 to date. And I know that, believe that most businesses would be very supportive of the strong message Blayney Shire Council would show by saying that we're committing for 4 years. So acknowledge Councillor Reynolds' concerns about the next council, but for me it's about now, and it's about coming out of COVID, it's about driving the region, it's about leveraging all the advantages that Orange 360 have already done. And as you can see in the report, they've got huge plans to drive visitor tourism through the region. So it's very exciting. I know we're all supportive of a group, so we're just discussing time frames here. I know we're all 100% behind the success and the future success of Orange 360. So I would be supportive to retain the recommendation as it is for the 4 years. Is there any other questions or comments before I ask Councillor Reynolds maybe to close the debate? Everybody's good? Okay, Councillor Reynolds, would you like to?
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and I will be brief. As I've stated, the next council will actually only have 2 months of a contract if we go for the 4 years, because the contract will come in from end of June, so it'll be July, August, and then they will have an election. So they will really have no say at all in the tourism promotion, and and we are locking into a contract. I'm not saying that Orange 360 is doing a bad job. One of my concerns is we only have one member of our community on the board of Orange 360. It is dominated by Orange, both businesses in Orange and Cabon, and also Orange Council. And one voice on a board is sometimes difficult, but I still support their program, and I understand they want a 4-year program, but it is an independent organisation. It's an independent board. It's not a council board, it's not a council organisation, and as far as I'm concerned, I would rather see a 2-year contract and then the next council be able to reassess it, and that's after approximately 6 months of being councillors, so it's not as though they're walking in the door and doing a reassessment on that day, because it would be at the end of June the next year. So if they were elected in September, they would have 4 months plus the next 5 months, so they'd have 9 months to reassess and see whether they thought Orange 360 was going. I just don't think that we should have to fall into the program of an independent organisation for their 4-year plan when we have one voice on that organisation, and it is what appears to be an independent organisation and board. So that's why I have moved this amendment, and I fully support the amendment I've moved. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Reynolds. So I've now closed the debate. I'll now put the motion for the amendment. Could I ask for a show of hands to support the amendment to reduce the funding agreement timeframe to 2 years? Hands, we have 1, 2. Yep. Against the amendment? I have a third one here, Councillor Denton. I declare the amendment lost. We now go to the original recommendation, which we do have. Original recommendation has been moved by Councillor Ewan and second by Councillor Newstead. There's no extra debate in regards to this item. We're happy. I'll put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Thank you. Declared carried. Thanks, Councillor Denton. Now move through to the next item, councillors. I invite Councillor Somervale to rejoin the meeting. Okay, thank you. Councillor Somervale has rejoined the meeting. I now draw your attention to item 3, page 37, Development Coordinator Program. Councillor Reynolds has moved 1, 2, 3 and 4, all the recommendations. Thank you, Councillor Reynolds. Do I have a seconder? Thank you. Councillor Ewan has seconded that. Councillors, any questions or comments in regards to this item? Councillor Reynolds would love to make a comment in regards to this item. Thank you, Councillor Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. As I've moved it, I thought I'd better make a comment. So the community will notice that there is a change from the previous funding agreement over the last, I think it was 3 years. we're reducing the funding towards the 3 development coordinators down from $60,000 to $30,000, which is in the recommendation here. But we've kept 3 coordinators across the community, so there's still support there. In analysing what they were doing as the 3 coordinators and cutting back a little bit of what they're expected to do, as well as the amount of time per week, we believe we've come up with a good compromise that will still let the community apply for grants and provide assistance in applying for grants, but at the same time potentially make more money available for other community groups in the community from some of the funds that we would be potentially using to fund the coordinators at the moment. So I support this recommendation wholeheartedly. Thank you.
Very much, Councillor Reynolds. Councillors, any other questions or comments in regards to this item? Obviously, it's been a review. It has been quite a successful program. The opportunity now to review it and to change it and to adjust it so it's more effective for the future as we see it. And as Councillor Reynolds has mentioned, it does free up some extra dollars to go back into the villages. No other questions or comments? Councillors, I'll put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Declared carried. The councillors now move through to page 42, item 4, and it's the COVID response sporting hire fees financial support. There's a recommendation there, councillors. Do I have a mover for this recommendation? Councillor Ewan has moved that way and Councillor Newstead has seconded it. I might just ask the General Manager to comment on a couple of minor adjustments to this report.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor, my apologies. I had some typos in the recommendation and some poor maths. The recommendation is that Council approve a reduction of the 1920 sporting facility hire income. That should have read 1920 as opposed to what it is in the business paper, which is 2021. And because the Millthorpe Mozzies 50% of 550 is 275, not 250, that makes the total for reimbursement, including GST, of $7,504, which is in fact $6,822 excluding GST. So my apologies for that small error, and thank you for everyone picking that up for me.
Thank you, Madam GM. Okay, councillors, no questions or comments regards to this item. It's a good initiative. Councillor Ewan.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. It is a good initiative and I think it shows council's showing great support to our sporting organisations by applying this reduction to their ground fees. I believe that because basically most of the organisations are voluntary run and they obviously gather their funding, from registrations and the like at the start of each of their seasons year, and of course not being able to play their chosen sport because of the COVID. I believe that this is a gesture that council has been able to do and support them so that they may continue to play sport within our Shire without a worry over their head of finding those extra dollars when they're not on the field, so to speak.
Thank you very much, Councillor Ewan. Okay, councillors, any other questions or comments regards to this item? Councillor Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just a question to the General Manager. When are we expecting that these sporting fields will be reopened and available for use for these clubs, particularly the junior clubs?
MGM.
Through you, Mr Mayor, they're gradually phasing in now with some training. I think junior sport competition can start 1st of July. And so as the restrictions are easing and public health orders are released, we're discussing with the various clubs how we might support their return to competition or to their scheduled programs. Some aren't starting again. So for example, senior rugby won't be having a season, potentially league are considering what they are doing. So it's just working with individual clubs about how we might support them. Purpose of this was to finalise the 1920 year, and if they were to recommence, well, then we would be charging them the new fees for 2021.
Madam GM, thank you, Councillor Reynolds. Any other questions or comments, councillors? If not, I will put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Aye.
Against? Declared carried. Councillors, now move through to item 5. Service in plan for sewerage services. Recommendation there, the council adopts the services plan. Mover for this recommendation, Councillor Somervale has moved that way. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Ewan has seconded that. Councillors, any questions or comments? Councillor Somervale.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. In moving this, I guess I need to remind those listening to this and councillors that the key element of this developer servicing plan is council fixing the developer service charge to apply during the life of this plan. And council's been through the process of calculating what the government says ought to be our developer service charge under the guidelines, and we were blown away by the fact that the calculated charge was over 15,000 for development in Blayney and over 42,000 for development in Millthorpe, which means that looking at Millthorpe, anyone wanting to develop a block of land has to fork out $42,000 as a headworks charge for connecting into the sewer before any other payment is made. Council has had to take a decision to strike a balance between charging that full developer service charge and charging what is reasonable, having regard to council's desire to encourage development in the Shire. One of the consequences of not charging the full calculated charge is that there is therefore a cross subsidy from all the existing sewer users in the Shire. From our 2 villages connected to the sewer, there's a subsidy that they will effectively be paying to encourage development. Council has tried to strike a balance between what's a reasonable charge and what the government says we ought to be charging. Just as an aside, I think it's quite inequitable, in fact, the rules that apply outside the Sydney metropolitan area. In Sydney, in the area serviced by Sydney Water, and in Newcastle, Hunter Water, there is no developer service charge by legislation or by a Treasury directive. That in Sydney and in Newcastle, enormous development going on, there's no developer service charge. Or put another way, all the existing users in the Sydney metropolitan area and in the Hunter metropolitan area subsidise development. The government put that in when there was a problem with not enough development in Sydney in the housing crisis. They said no developer charges. The regional areas of New South Wales are stuck with a different regulatory regime, which means we've got to charge this under pain of suffering a breach of the best practice management guidelines if we don't, and that is going to be one of the consequences. So I personally think that councils like ours ought to have the discretion to charge the full amount or charge nothing and not have to suffer the pain of breach of the guidelines if we don't. One thing that it does show, though, is that in calculating a charge, looking at Millthorpe, for example, at $42,000, that's an indication of the fact that the cost of running our sewer business is very high, given the number of sewer connections we've got through our 2 villages and the length of sewer mains and so on we've got. They've calculated the new development should pay $42,000 to plug into the system. That shows you how much they think needs to be paid for each new development to cover the cost of maintaining the system. So the level of subsidy is one thing, but I think the most important thing is the setting of our sewer charges, because we've got to set our sewer charges on the basis that we recover the cost, long-term marginal cost of building, maintaining, replacing, repairing, operating our sewer system. And that's where the important thing lies, not so much in what we charge developers. I think council, and I recommend this resolution to council, that we've tried to strike a balance between charging the full charge and charging nothing, which would mean that the cross-subsidy is very, very substantial. I commend the resolution to councillors.
Thank you very much, Councillor Sunvale, and very well explained. This has been quite a difficult process for us all, trying to find that balance between supporting development and how much money is required for future upgrades and maintenance of our sewerage facilities. Councillor Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and I fully endorse what Councillor Somerville has said and fully support his comments. It's important to note from a ratepayer's point of view that they will see a special note that says $55 will be included in their rate bill when the new rate bill does come out for the next quarter. As well as that, in our current fees and charges, we are also proposing to increase the sewage rates by 5%. So ratepayers will notice a fairly substantial increase in the cost for sewage services. But as Councillor Somerville alluded to, it's been under best management practice. It's been pushed upon us to charge this fee, and also if you look at the 10-year plan, I think it's about 25, 26, we have to look at pretty well upgrading or totally replacing our current sewage treatment plant. So we need the cash reserves so that we can install a new facility at around that time. I beg to be corrected if it's a year out, but as in we have to start saving now so that we can get that new plant in, as well as maintain and upgrade the sewage facilities that we do have across our network. So fully support this recommendation and what my fellow councillor, Councillor Somerville, has said.
Thank you very much, Councillor Reynolds. I endorse those comments as well. Any other questions or comments, councillors, regards to this? I'd just like to say yes, there will be a noticeable increase in the sewerage rate for a typical residential bill, but we're certainly hoping too that will be offset a little bit by the $40 deduction in the garbage waste charge as well. So that's a little positive to come out of this. But it is important that we do manage the sewerage facilities on behalf of the community now and for the future. And this is part of it. We'll be doing a strategic business plan or a sewer business plan now. And of course, this will be revisited on a fairly regular basis so we know that we're heading in the right direction as far as planning for the future. Okay, councillors, if there's no other questions or comments regards to this item, we have a mover, we have a seconder. I'll now put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Declared carried. Thank you, councillors. That concludes our extraordinary meeting for Blayney Shire. I'd like to thank you all for your attendance and like to declare the meeting closed.